Welcome to the show. Today we're going to be talking about Borderlands 2, developed by Gearbox. And the Borderlands series is deeply rooted in the Diablo series' aesthetics of exploration and collection, because this game is about collecting guns. And it's about collecting cool looking guns and cool firing guns. And really, what good is a game that's about collecting weapons when you have nothing fun to use them on? Which is why I decided to do this game specifically with enemy design as well, because it does a pretty good job of making enemies that are fun and unique to the game. And the enemies have a lot of personality. You've already seen them get lit on fire. You've seen them have some acid thrown on them, and we'll be seeing a lot more of that for this whole video. And when that happens, they react in a very overblown comedic way. They will scream at you about it. They will do a ton of physical stuff with it. They'll start disintegrating based on what you just shot them with.
Silence!
Oh, what the hell?
They have a lot of character just based on you shooting them. Now, that's great. I love that. It is an immensely fun thing to be able to say this game both has fun guns and fun enemies. And, when I was initially going to do the video, I was going to bag on the game's enemies for, they're fun visually and audibly, but they're not that fun to shoot. And when I was recording this video, I realized, no, you're wrong. They are fun to shoot. Because, it does put a smile on my face to hear enemies say, as they burn to death, "I smell delicious." That's just good, funny, comedic writing. I don't think you're going to hear that, unfortunately, because I'm not in the right place when I recorded this, but it's that sort of comedy that this game is about, that dark humor where, like right now, you see the giant guy with this big door shield with a tiny little person tied to it. Why is that there? I don't know 100%. It's fun. It makes it way more interesting to have options based around there's a guy with another enemy tied to him. And we're going to talk a bit more about that later when I don't accidentally kill the person tied to the shield, because they have a lot of engaging interaction based on that. But these enemies have a ton of personality. These enemies ooze personality. They're visually appealing. They are all visually distinct. I don't even have to read the name to know what it is. And also that name changes based on what playthrough you're on. So you don't have to remember what the name is because you know what it is by looking at it. And it does have its fair share of just human with gun without anything else, but it breaks it up enough with bigger guys with guns, with guys with shields with guns, with guys with tools and melee weapons instead of guns. So it does a nice job of mixing it up and making you think a little bit differently. And of course, the suicidal enemies who will charge at you and try and blow you up along with themselves. And, it's great when you have that variety even within just one type of enemy. Now, this game has a ton of types of enemies who, unfortunately, you're not going to be able to see all of them. You're going to get to see some of the robotic enemies who are still fairly humanoid, but they have a nice, distinctive visual design too, along with having a decent amount of variety within that group itself to keep everything fresh. And as much as this game is able to keep the enemies fresh and throw new things at you, it's a long game. It's a considerably lengthy title. And they also are trying to get you to play this for hundreds and hundreds of hours. So obviously, after a certain point, the enemies are going to lose some of that new feel, that this is cool and different. I haven't seen this before. And I've gotten to that point. I've played both this game for probably over 200 hours at this point on both the consoles and the PC. I played the first game to death, and as much as I've enjoyed them, yeah, the enemies will eventually wear on you because of just how long you've been interacting with them, and you've gotten a little bit sick of them. I mean, it's always fun to hear them scream and yell at you and talk about what they're going to do. Oh, and midget popped off. So some of the enemies in this game will actually, a lot of them will attack each other, but it's always fun when the humanoid enemy attacks another humanoid enemy because they start talking to each other a little bit, and it's just comical to see what happens. And all these enemies interact differently with each other. They'll talk to you especially. And like I said in the Dead Space video, that builds up your relationship with them. It's still a very much give and take relationship, especially because you're fighting them for such long periods of time, both per encounter and just for the entire game. So you do build up a relationship with some of them, and you'll recognize them quite a bit just because of that visual design. And that's great. I love when you get that sort of relationship. Now I think it's a bit shallower than some of the other games just because it's very audio based, and I'm not saying audio design isn't important. I think it's incredibly important, but they're not animated quite as well as some of the other games I'm showcasing, just because I think there's so many of them, and I applaud them, and I applaud Gearbox for making such great variety. But at the same time, that does come at the cost of giving each of them just that much more personality, because all the humanoid enemies, for as visually distinctive as they are, their animations are still identical across the board. And I'm not complaining about that from a more just a would be nice aspect. I'm not saying they did a bad job. I think they did a great job on the animations themselves, but it's more animations cost time and money, and those are both finite. So I understand why the game is the way it is, but it doesn't help make the enemies feel quite as distinct outside of their vocals and visual design, because you're seeing all the humanoid enemies react in the same way. You're seeing all the spider ant enemies react in the same way. You're seeing all the robots react in the same way. So that just makes them bleed together a little bit more than would be ideal. But that's the price you pay for variety, is each individual enemy itself isn't quite as personable, and you can't build the same kind of relationship up with that enemy as you would if there were fewer of them, but you still had enough to differentiate them. And I think some of it's they're not quite as well animated as the enemies in something like the new Wolfenstein game, once again, just because of the variety. If you're going to have 10 overall types of enemies plus, 5 subcategories in each overall category, you're not going to be able to spend the time really cranking up the quality of the animations for each of them. Now, once again, I think the audio and the writing they did for the combat dialogue really picked that up and ran and made it so that you can still feel that personality for each subcategory of enemy. It's just because it's only with the audio. It makes it a little bit less special because it's not both the audio and the physicalness. It's just one or two, not all three at once, of the physical design, the animation design, and the audio design for each enemy. But I still think this game does a great job with its enemies. It's just volume means less individual personality, and that's something I think we need to recognize, where if you have variety, like, I mean, we're shooting exploding robots now, you know. You go from shooting crazy people who want to murder you to robots who want to murder you within the span of about 15 minutes with this game. That's something to be applauded, but you just have to realize it does have a cost. And that's something I don't think enough people recognize, is if you have variety, you're not going to have something else. If you have quality individual enemies who all have their own individual unique personalities, you're not going to get the variety. But this game is almost able to do both flawlessly. Its animations aren't quite as individualized as other games with less variety are, but they still have a lot of personality. Just you're going to be seeing the animations a lot. And I mean a lot, because it's a long game and you're fighting these enemies all the time. So the length and just the sheer amount of them doesn't help keep them differentiated. But the game's enemies have so much visual and audio personality that I think it can get away with it better than if it wasn't as carefully designed as it is. And, you know, as we wind up here, that's something to keep in mind, that game design is about trade-offs. In addition to trying to make the best relationship you can between the player and your enemies, you have to remember those trade-offs. If you want variety, you're going to sacrifice on individual quality. If you want the reverse, you're going to have to sacrifice the other way. And it's just that you need to keep that in mind, as everything in life is a compromise. And I think that about does it for now. Catch you guys later.